Hi, you guys. How are you doing? Nice to be with you again. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio in this incredibly high-tech studio where we have a mic that extends and amazing things like that. Hope you're having a good week and weekend wherever you are in the world and whatever part of the week you might be watching this on if it's an archive. And wanted to share with you kind of a strange experience that I had this week. While I was thinking of it earlier today, I made a couple of notes because, and you'll hear it in some more detail pretty soon because it was one of those spontaneous phone calls to our friend Russ Tanner, who is kind of an aircraft and jet engine specialty person who's been watching the sky for a long time. And in fact, before I ever started Lost Arts Radio with Doug, Russ and I were on a show with Dane Wigington for Geoengineering Watch Radio. Really interesting show on geoengineering or chemtrails in the vernacular. Watching the drought be caused in California by the spraying. It wasn't, well, yeah, it was actually man-made climate change that did it because every time the normal storms came in off the Pacific. In California, I was born in California, lived there a long time. And the storms come either from the North Pacific or the South Pacific almost all the time. And then they come inland when the summer drought that they have every year is over. And it comes in and it rains over the state and it puts snow into the Sierra Nevada, which irrigates the agriculture in all the cities the next summer. It's a really good system. Somebody very smart designed it. And in the last years that we were watching it on Geoengineering Watch Radio, every time one of those normal storms would come in off the ocean, this fleet of planes would fly in, usually from both sides, north and south, spray all this stuff around, which of course you know is a conspiracy theory, right? And stop the storm and kind of change the characteristics of the vapor, the water vapor in the air, and delay its coagulating into big enough drops to fall until it was about 2,000 or 3,000 feet, 3,000 miles farther east across the country, and made a drought in California, almost wiped out, the livability of the state. And they haven't really stopped that yet, and they've added unusual fires and all kinds of stuff that they're working on now. But that's where I met Russ, because he was the co-host with me, and Dane was the main researcher. He's still running geoengineeringwatch.org and a radio show that he runs too. Other presentations, he's been working on this for a long time. And so the unusual situation, and again, I have to warn you that on this show, a lot of the stuff that we get into, probably more and more, even though I'm trying not to get kicked off the air, is going to be seen as conspiracy theories and extremism and all the things that they call information that we're not supposed to know. And I knew what was behind the geoengineering. It's not just a man-made climate change, which is one of its main purposes, and it's very successful at that. It's disrupting the whole global climate and weather patterns, and nobody honest really even knows whether it's getting warmer or colder or what, aside from the effect of the geoengineering. And they're not going to find out if they don't stop it. And all the groups against it haven't managed to get it stopped so far. And I think most people still think it's, imaginary and not really happening. But with the massive investment of time and money that's gone into this global fleet of planes spraying aluminum and barium and strontium compounds, and a lot of other things too, as we've had scientists on the show like Clifford Carnicom, one of the really outstanding ones that's been working on the contents of what's falling out of the sky for many years. And he's found not just these toxic metals, which would be certainly bad enough to poison the whole biosphere, but also very unusual creatures that are not, well, they're kind of creatures because creature literally just means something that's created, right? But it's not exactly created by nature or God. It's created by man, or at least partially. And he calls it cross-domain bacteria because it's not one obvious type of life. It kind of combines characteristics of several. It's been associated with what people complain about called Morgellons syndrome, which is a horrible condition that usually if you give in and go to a medical doctor about it, most of the medical doctors will say, "Oh, really? Is that what's happening to you? Maybe you need to talk to a psychiatrist." And then psychiatrists, of course, now mostly are drug dealers too, except for rare, really sane ones. And then they'll get you on drugs that have nothing to do with Morgellons at all, and you've got these fibers coming out of your skin. It's not fun. I mean, I haven't had it, but I've known quite a few people that have. And Clifford Carnicom has done a lot of research, and he's got a site, carnicominstitute.org, if I remember right. And they're still looking at Morgellons, and they've got people in a forum there, and you might want to look into that if you know somebody that's involved in that kind of thing. But anyway, that's where I met Russ. And so over the last week, and increasingly before that, I've been noticing a very strange phenomenon where I am here in northern Arizona, which is a place that's known for having 300 or more days per year of crystal clear weather. And it used to, and it actually still does. It's just that you can't actually see it. The sky is almost always so crisscrossed and just wiped out by these spreading spray trails, which of course the National Weather Service that I've talked to says those are ice crystals, and you're not a scientist, you don't understand. They try to explain it in short words and stuff so I can follow them. And it's just what do you do if you don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but you're finding evidence of conspiracy that's so massive, even the conspiracy theorists underestimate it. It's a strange situation, but what happened really strange in the last couple of weeks and somewhat before, no visible chemtrails. And I've been hearing from different parts of the country and different parts of the world, people noticing more and more of that same phenomenon that's as strange now as the original spraying that got widespread in the early 90s was then. And so I thought, why don't we just call up Russ Tanner? And this is I've had some incredible spontaneous conversations with Russ, who's really aware of a lot of different things going on in the world that all tie together. And there are a lot of people that kind of specialize on one thing. They know about GMOs, and that's like the biggest thing there is happening. And other ones that know about just geoengineering, and nothing is important except for that. And same thing with pesticides or nuclear power or preemptive war, EMF fields, 5G, and like that's the main thing for that particular group. And those specialized groups and individuals do a lot of good, but not too many people have, the bigger picture of how all of these things are incredibly interrelated. They all come from the same source, and they go through different channels, through levels of corporate interest where the motivation is profit and power and controlling people. But above that, and this really marks me as a crazy conspiracy person, but above that, it's all satanic. That's where it comes from. And above that, it comes from sources that most people wouldn't understand or wouldn't want to. Too scary. Anyway, so I thought, what's going on? I'm sure they wouldn't just say, well, rats, some people started finding out about chemtrails or geoengineering, and we're just going to have to stop. I mean, that's about as likely as a mugger breaking into your house and seeing a sign that says gun-free zone and saying, oh, shoot, we can't kill anybody here. It's a gun-free zone. Rats. Why did they have to put that sign up? Now we're just going to have to go to some other house where it's not a gun-free zone. And that's not really how things work, as you probably know if you're watching the show. So we called up Russ and had what turned into a long conversation, and we did get his input on why the a seeming lack of chemtrails, and it's only seeming because they're working on ways of it not being visible, and they have been for some time. And we'll tell you in the phone call how that's known to Russ especially, and a few other people. But that's going to be the whole phone call. I asked Doug if he'd record it because I had a feeling. I've been having these phone calls with Russ for years on different subjects, and every time we finish, we say, "Wow, that would have been something that almost, a lot of other people would have been interested in. Why didn't we record it?" And then Russ will say, "You're right, we should have recorded that," and then we just do it again and never remember. So we remembered this time, and it'll be on shortly on the Sunday show. So watch for that on Lost Arts Radio, 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, Sunday nights. And one of them is going to be you guys listening in on the private phone call with Russ. It's quite interesting. Anyway, that was the first thing I wanted to share with you. The spraying has been spreading worldwide, as you probably know, since the early 90s, about 92 or 94. Actually going on for decades before that, back to at least the 40s and maybe sooner. It's not like the authorities want you to believe that it's ice crystals. The big deal is not the ice crystals and the water vapor. The big deal is it's radically poisonous, and it interacts with EMF fields. And it's part of the larger picture of mind control and a bunch of things that many people still wouldn't believe. But I've spent many decades putting this stuff together, starting in the 60s, and pretty sure this is true. It's not just me. It's a lot of people have understood it. If you want more detailed documentation and information on how the geoengineering program is going on, you can go to geoengineeringwatch.org. That's mostly on the climate aspect of it, but it has some other stuff, and globalskywatch.com also is very good at, and Global Skywatch has a directory on it of other geoengineering websites all over the world, run by groups that are trying to get awareness of it and trying to figure out some way, to get this thing to stop before the whole world is irrevocably poisoned by it, and the weather is beyond recall. Is like the Earth is, even though the whole Gaia climate change thing is a total fraud, and I know people will hate me for saying that and say he's a fascist, racist, misogynist, homophobe, or whatever I am for thinking that's a fraud. But it's not relevant what I am. It's just relevant what that program is, and that program's a complete hoax. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a corresponding real aspect of it. That's what a lot of people don't get. I was looking at some articles connected with geoengineeringwatch.org, and I was seeing one that said, well, how can climate change or global warming be a hoax and still be real? And it's a really good question. And it takes you to the next level that's not superficial thinking about the whole geoengineering thing, and start putting some of these things together. The hoax is that you are supposed to be terrified of global warming and really worried about it as much as possible. They're not trying to hide it. It's the opposite. They're trying to make it like the issue. And if, in case it gets colder, which they of course don't know, not being in charge of, they're trying, but they're not in total charge of the climate. And it could turn on a dime. The Earth is powerful, and almost all of the systems in it, arrogant modern science knows virtually nothing. And all the massive amount of things it thinks it knows, many of them are wrong. That's why it keeps changing all the time. That and political reasons. So just in case it gets colder, which they know can't control, it might start getting colder, or it might just keep getting hotter and hotter. But that's why they use the term climate change instead of all global warming, and they haven't used the term global cooling for a while, except a small minority are calling it that now. But either way, if it gets colder or hotter, the main point is you're supposed to be terrified. And they're trying to get kids crying about this now. That's really child abuse. The kids don't understand the depth of all this stuff, telling us that the world's going to end in 12 years or 10 years or some say 7 years now. Kids have no idea. They believe the adults that program them to say that, and they are terrified. The adults are really messing up the minds of those kids. And again, there's different sides and aspects of all this stuff. Life on Earth may end a lot sooner than 7 years, but it's not going to be because of what those guys are saying. That has its own ulterior motives. And the main one is for you to give up your freedoms, including the whole idea of national sovereignty, move into a unified, consolidated world tyranny, followed by gradual extermination of what's left of life on the planet. That's my bottom line that I see in what they're doing after a really long time of investigating it with no preconceptions and no party affiliation and nothing to prove. I just wanted to know what's happening, and I didn't care if it contradicted everything I thought was happening. Fine, correct me, let me know what's really happening. That was my attitude, and my understanding is that's the attitude of science. You don't go in there like, a drug company says, we want a study showing this drug is safe. And there's no pressure or anything. It's just that if you find out it's not safe, we'll fire you. It's just like they delete subjects from a study if they don't come up with the right, total health safety and things like that. It's corruption beyond what most people would possibly imagine. So I guess the main thing is if you don't know a lot about geoengineering or chemtrails, go to those sites and start studying. They have massive resources and directory of other sites. And carnicominstitute.org is another really good one about the ingredients that are falling down on the earth, including the cross-domain bacteria, that he may be the guy that named it. I think I haven't heard of anybody else really calling it out like that. But so it was the blue skies for many days in a row that was the strange experience. And we'll give you all the details in the recorded phone call. That's, I think, an hour and a half long or something. We answered what we think is the solution to why the disappearing chemtrails, but we got into a lot of other connected issues that are all tied together. Geoengineering is not a standalone subject. That's this compartmentalization mentality that we're trained in education all the way up through PhD and medical school. It's like each individual becomes a super specialist, memorizing. They think it's learning, but it's actually memorizing a whole huge amount of information about one narrow subject, and it has many purposes to structure it that way. One of them, of course, is that if you're an incredible specialist who knows more than anybody in the solar system about this really narrow subject, but you don't have any contextual understanding about how that fits together into the bigger picture of geopolitics and everything else that's going on, you're perfect for being used as a tool by some evil, toxic corporation or government, and you don't even know it because you're just doing a really great job at your narrow specialty with no idea how that it's being used against humanity. Anyway, because of the interrelationship of all these things, that real life is absolutely not compartmentalized at all. So in that way, education doesn't fit real life in the least. It ended up with me wondering how many of us realize what's the real scope of the bigger picture and all the types of information that are specifically kept away from us, or we're taught the opposite, so we won't start suspecting what's really going on. And I think, though, there are people spontaneously starting to realize more and more of the bigger picture, their awareness, instead of this narrow tunnel vision that is what we're taught in school, including medical school and everything. It's starting to widen and say, whoa, I didn't know that was connected. And as people start to wake up to that, there's a race to make censorship so complete that we'll be kept in the dark and not able to communicate about any of the forbidden subjects at all. And that's until the program is complete, but that's already starting. And what do I mean by until the program is complete? Crazy as it may sound, I think the program completion, in their minds, the people at the very top levels who are not just after money and power at the corporate or government agency level, at the top level, they know that the completion of the project is when there's no more life on Earth, like a ceremonial sacrifice, and that will make it complete. So the question is, do we realize how many connected areas of information are being hidden from us now? You know, the idea is to eventually criminalize even talking about these subjects, and even now it's happening. There's a number of specific words and subjects that you're not allowed to talk about. There's a phrase in New York City that's a normal phrase. It's 2 words. And if you say it in New York City, the mayor thought it would be really good for everybody for you to have a $250,000 fine for every time you do it. It's completely amazing. And we've put articles about that on lostartsradio.com in case you want to read about it. But, you know, they're using a number of tools to try to narrow speech. And the idea is if you can't say something, you're going to stop thinking those words. And if you don't have the language, you don't have the thought, and you'll be easier to make into a zombie slave until they kill you, which is, of course, the most efficient way to finish up the whole thing. So it's understandable that most people find it way too scary to think about any of this stuff or really look at it. So they brush it off as a conspiracy theory, or they just get mad if you try to talk about it. A lot of the people that I've had discussions with, or tried to have discussions with, that brought things up to me that identified themselves as especially liberal and progressive, which I thought was supposed to be really nice and open, and liberal means liberty, right? And you believe in getting to live your life however you want as long as you don't go out and hurt other people. They really get mad when you bring these things up, the ones that I've met, and get very violent talking about how it's so important that we're tolerant and loving to everybody, and they will beat you up if you don't agree with that. It's very strange. And it's really not their fault, because humanity's been programmed for thousands of years by governments and religious authorities to be afraid of everything, from everything in nature. You know, animals are going to come eat you, and to human rulers and even God you're supposed to be terrified of. And I remember in the old Peanuts comic strip, this is old people like me remember this like it was yesterday. And Peanuts was really neat comic by Charles Schulz, and 2 of the main characters in it were Lucy and Charlie Brown. And Lucy, instead of having these are kids characters, and instead of having a lemonade stand on the street, Lucy was a little more unusual, and she had a psychiatric services booth on the street, just made out of kind of a wood cubicle that she sat behind and looked out over the desk. And she said, it said on it, psychiatry 5 cents. Obviously it was before a lot of inflation, and she was probably trying to break into the market cheaper because she may not have had a complete psychiatric background. And she was diagnosing Charlie Brown to see what the Latin name of his fear condition was. And she went through all these things like the Latin word for fear of being in elevators and in the dark, or fear of poisonous snakes. And he said, no, that's not it. And she finally was getting really tired, and his time was running out for the 5 cents. And she said, well, maybe you have panophobia. And he said, what's that? And she said, fear of everything. And he said, that's it. And she goes spinning backwards over the chair. And that's what we're trained to have. It's not really a joke. And I think I had it for a lot of my earlier life. And finally, later on, I was taught and shown by an actual fearless person that fear is optional. It's really true. I mean, it's not just like a belief that you have. you say, well, fear is optional, and then you go around totally fearful all the time, just unconscious of it. It's not like that. Fear really is optional. It's a mental program, and it's totally useless and counterproductive. It doesn't make you run away faster from saber-toothed tigers, because the people who are the fastest runners in the world, they can do it without being, they're not afraid. They don't have to make themselves really terrified in order to run the 100-meter dash, faster than anybody else. They just run fast. And it ruins your judgment, and it clouds everything. It's just not useful. So once you learn that, then you can look back at things as they really are and not be emotionally dragged down, and your vision gets clearer. So the idea of looking at, if we have time, I've already used up half our time before I get to the list, so as usual, I'm going to have to talk at chipmunk speed or just hit the highlights of this. If we know what areas of knowledge are being forbidden, then we know what kind of real education we need to do with ourselves. And we'll be able to decide what decisions to make with our time and how to make things better, and we can start learning. It's just another aspect of what I've told you before. I totally trust government, no question. Government agencies, corporate authorities, things like that. Because generally, if they give you advice or tell you something is really good or really bad, it's almost always true if you just remember to reverse what they say and then apply it. And you have to be careful with that, because they may, as I've said before, they may tell the truth by mistake or for some other nefarious reason, but generally you can pretty much count on it being reversible all the time for the best results. So if you want to use it as an exercise of staying relaxed and clear, let's look at what we're not supposed to find out and see how all these subjects are not, disconnected specialties like you're supposed to think. They all absolutely fit together. And we already said geoengineering. That's, in other words, real man-made climate change. All the people who are falling right into the trap and say, be terrified of global warming, it's worse than you ever thought, and we have to give up all our rights, and we have to pay these people setting up a new carbon exchange like a stock exchange. And if we, only when you generate carbon, which is everything you do in your whole life, and if you pay them, the climate will stop changing. It's going to be great. And people get terrified, and they actually believe in this kind of stuff. That's how it's a hoax. It doesn't mean that the climate is not unstable or damaged. It just means they're using that as a hoax. So it's real man-made climate change, poisoning the air, water, soil, food, all living things, and cutting out the sunlight too. I think the last figure I saw of the amount of sunlight that's being blocked already from reaching the surface of the earth is something like 22 or 24%. I could be off a little bit, but that's really serious. Sunlight was put as this thing that comes from the sun and hits the earth and other things. It's very important. It wasn't just like to look interesting. Plant life doesn't grow without sunlight, and humans die without sunlight too. Then you're not supposed to know that. You're supposed to think that sunlight will kill you. And I think I saw some official medical authority saying there's no safe level for solar radiation. This is just enough to completely turn your mind inside out. But again, like I told you, I totally trust these authority figures to tell us what's going on. So it's cutting down the sunlight. I told you that Carnicom discovered cross-domain bacteria. And so climate change is a hoax, but that's exactly what is being created by geoengineering. And if you took that all away, you could probably see what the climate is doing. But rather than trying to micromanage it back to normal, whatever we think is normal, it's kind of like the difference. If you're sick in your human body and you've got some terrible disease, you can try to poison the disease, which usually kills the patient, but that's cutting edge science, so it's okay. Or you can say, how is this, what this patient is doing, out of line with deeper laws of nature and harmony, and how can we bring it back to that and let the body heal the disease, which is that conscious life force in the body is the only thing that heals any disease anyway. No doctor, even a natural doctor, can cure a disease. That life force in the body can, if it's going to happen at all. And it's the same with the earth, because in spite of the thing that the earth and the whole Gaia thing and everything, most of it is a complete malicious hoax, misusing kids and everything else to push it. At the same time as that, the earth and everything else is alive and has consciousness in it. And that's why it responds to what we do, and it can be healed like a physical body can. So we have to get back some of our ability to actually think and perceive what's going on, and lose the arrogance that we know everything and science really has it nailed now, and that's so far from the truth. It's pretty much opposite. So one of the big hoaxes is, stop using oil and gas and coal and causing all this climate change. That's a hoax. But at the same time, using the oil and gas and coal is a really low level of energy technology. It's very dirty. It can be used as an excuse for wars and invading other countries. It's not really a good health thing to be putting into the environment, spilling in the oceans when tankers have trouble. And see, so those are both true at the same time. And they do want you to be terrified and stop using energy. What they don't, so that you'll have this thing called austerity, meaning you can barely function because you're saving the earth. That's all complete fraud. But there are clean and free energy technologies, as Dr. Stephen Greer has pointed out, that have been available for more than 100 years. And they have this little problem where if somebody brings it out, they commit suicide by somebody, shooting or stabbing them or whatever. And it tends to not ever be known. If you just do like what the Green New Deal says and give up all the coal and oil and the so-called fossil fuel petroleum-based energies, it would destroy a lot of economies. It would kill millions of people. It would wipe out, people's livelihoods. It would be a really terrible suicidal type idea. That's what the Green New Deal includes. But if you transition that and you expose the energy sources that are available, that's a whole different thing, and that could be spectacular, revolutionary in a good way. So that's one of the things besides geoengineering that we're not supposed to know, that we haven't needed those energy sources for a really long time, longer than almost any of us have been alive, and they don't intend to let you see the real sources. So look at some of Dr. Greer's work if you want details on that. The clean and free energy sources, like a little box about this big that powers your whole house or a whole subdivision of houses or things like that, those are real. And you're never supposed to know about that. That's, I guess, number two. And those devices have been either invented or reverse engineered. And there are both types, and they both do similar things. And you might, if I'm not putting you to sleep and you're listening, you might say, reverse engineered, what are you talking about? Again, look at Dr. Greer's work, Stephen Greer. He's got a bunch of long videos on YouTube that haven't been banned yet. They may be now or soon, but last time I checked, they haven't been. And he interviewed a team. He had some very unusual experiences in his own life, near-death experience, and interacting with people that are not supposed to exist, that are not from this place. Earth, they call it, our planet's called Earth, and they're not from there. And he actually had some direct experience that really affected what he thought about all this. And it ended up motivating him to find out, am I the only person that's had interaction with so-called ET beings and ET craft and things like that? Or is it much more widespread, like so many things, and it's being covered up? So he had an amazing idea for a project, and he interviewed hundreds of people that had worked in levels of the deep state government, the corporate government, that had clearances way above presidential level. The president is supposed to be the highest for the general population to believe, but above that, there are levels and levels and levels. of the structure that's really in control. He found some of those people that were willing to talk. They were either so old that they were about to die, or they just didn't care anymore, or whatever, and they amazingly went on video and said, yeah, this is exactly what my job was in this capacity. And some of them went to so-called crash sites for UFOs. Roswell was not the only one, and they generally were not spontaneous crashes. They were shot down with scalar energy weapons by the US government, or possibly other governments, operating all over the world, actually. Not a nice thing to do to people that were just different, but didn't do anything to us at all. So that might be number 3 that we're not ever supposed to know about. And that was one of the things that John Kennedy, who was one of the rare, well-motivated presidents, not a perfect person by a long shot, but motivated to help his country, not destroy it, which made him great. And he said not only was he going to shut down the stuff with Vietnam and shut down the Federal Reserve, which is absolutely unacceptable, but he was going to expose everything that was going on with the UFO stuff in the government. And that was absolutely unacceptable. And shortly after that and everything else, he was killed. And then in the 50s, the U.S. government hired Disney Studios, according to Dr. Greer, for a campaign to make anybody who believed in intelligent ET life, aside from the fact that there's almost no intelligent life on our planet, people who believed in it elsewhere, they had to be made to look like complete idiots, and mentally ill, like the little green men thing and stuff like that. That's what Disney invented. Made some great cartoons, which I'm sure we've all enjoyed, where the little green man jumps out of the flying saucer and does some weird thing or other. That would be number 3. That the conspiracy theory term was not invented in the 50s. That was after Kennedy was shot. They needed a way to make people look really crazy who thought there was more than one person involved in that, because there are a lot of people involved in it, and more than one person shooting too. And then I guess when Stephen Greer interviewed all these people, and he got a lot of death threats and stuff, and he just ignored them all and kept going with the best security that he could, he got reports from direct observation of downed craft and reverse engineering teams confirming working zero-point energy generation and gravity control, which means you flying without fuel. It's quite useful. In the 50s. Okay, that was happening in the 50s. It's now later than the 50s. Remember, they've got all those years that have happened since then. That means who knows what they've got now. But in the early times, Werner von Braun told a friend of his, close friend, Carol Rosin, who's got a radio show now on Blog Talk and some other places. Like to have her on Lost Arts Radio sometime if she's listening. Before he died, before von Braun died, who had come over in Operation Paperclip with the German scientists after World War II that were hired by the U.S., and there were lots of them. He warned Carol, told Carol to warn the people, which she's done on radio and other ways, of the ultimate false flag that was being planned with. They would use the gravity control technology that they had fabricated what almost looks like a natural flying saucer, and they knew how to fly them, except the synthetic ones, at least at that time, had seams with rivets, and the real ones had no seams at all. And they were also a different material. The people at the crash sites reported that where the craft was broken, it was like a living creature that was trying to heal, and there was this definite conscious feeling coming. It was really interesting, and colors that were not normally seen. But anyway, Werner von Braun told Carol Rosin to warn all of us that the ultimate false flag that was coming would be a fake alien invasion, because the point was to drop national sovereignty, get everybody into one centralized control, and then eliminate them, including the perpetrators. That's one reason it's not often understood. This is a suicide mission on their part, ultimately. So most of what Mike has talked about with this, and I can't, as you know, mention his last name because he's banned everywhere, and we disappear by mentioning his last name, similar to some other people. Anyway, all that's going on, and you're absolutely not supposed to know about it. It's one of the reasons that Kennedy had to disappear. So back very quickly to more mundane issues that you're not told. In the agricultural arena, which is very important, shouldn't be a specialty. Everybody should know about growing food because you have to eat food. That's the thing about it, is that it's an energy carrier. And when it goes into your body and these trillions of cells and all these operations that science has no clue about happen, and the energy is absorbed from the food like a carrier wave into the cells and living cells in your body. How you grow the food is really important. The system of nature was designed so that would work to keep you healthy and strong and naturally immune without getting things injected into you and stuff like that. Growing food with agricultural chemical fertilizers is suicidal, and it creates a horrible mess of degenerative disease, which we are witnessing now. Of course, it's hard to pin it on one cause because there are so many concurrent causes of being out of harmony with nature. Anyway, agricultural fertilizers and then pesticides, which are apparently necessary because the fertilizers mess up the natural balance in the soil, and then the plant starts getting attacked by insects and disease, and the poison dealers say, see, the world's going to starve if we don't poison this food before you eat it. And everybody knows that that's what you have to do. And then GMOs are even worse, if possible, than all that. A lot of the so-called conservative people that I've talked to, they think that all environmental issues are a hoax and there's nothing wrong. Rachel Carson was insane and all this kind of... No, they're not a hoax, and she wasn't insane. The hoax is a hoax. The issues are real. And what you're not supposed to understand is that using that kind of agriculture for even one day is absurdly insane. It doesn't mean that the farmers are bad. They're educated and they're trained by extension service and agents and everybody that's cutting edge science to feed the world, and they're the biggest victims because they're working in these clouds of poison, and it has bad long-term effects for them. If they could grow food in the truly organic way, not USDA organic, but way better, and be told the truth about how to do it, they would be the biggest health practitioners on the planet, helping everybody stay healthy, and they'd get the benefits of it too. So real organic food, not USDA organic, but the real one, is like a bare minimum of what anybody should consume. It's not in support of the Green New Deal, which talks about good agriculture, but it has terrible other things that would ruin the U.S. as a country and end freedom, at least for America. This is from my own experience with agriculture and organic gardening and things that started in the mid-'60s when I was a university student. And it's real. And talking about it's not worth buying organic food because it's a little more expensive, or because some farmers that really have no ethics might be cheating the system, that's not very smart, because the openly non-organic food is grown. Just if it were only the chemical fertilizers, it would disrupt your body just for that. But it's much worse that they actually spray toxic chemicals on it, which are absorbed right into the whole plant. You cannot wash them off. And then you eat that it's not a good plan. And you're not supposed to really understand the depth of that. The farmers need help to transition to a better system, and not by force, but by telling them, you've been fooled already. Now we're going to unfool you and teach you how to get back to real farming. And the real farming, the real whole food, especially raw, is the strongest nutrition, and whole live food, that's medicine. And Hippocrates even knew that a long time ago. But you're supposed to not know it now. And it's very closely connected to another area that you're not supposed to understand, which is what they call medicine. It's just it's kind of a disgrace that they get to use that word, because what it is now, I'm not talking about emergency trauma care, and some of that is brilliantly life-saving, and the people in it can be very heroic. But what they're taught in medical school about health and disease is really a disgrace, and it's not medicine at all. It's poison. Even if you call it advanced cutting-edge medicine, and it's this little white tablet or pretty colored tablet, if it's a toxic chemical, it doesn't matter if you call it the most fantastic life-saving medicine in the world. It's still a toxic chemical. The body does not like it, and it's a threat to your existence. So I would say, if you're going to use any of those things, whether you take them orally or they're injected into you, at least read the full, not the information sheet, which says it's all great, but the real package insert, in which they have to tell you the little, what they call side effects. They're not side effects, they're primary effects of the poison. And most of them include the primary effect that it may kill you or make it worse than if it kills you. So, you know, informed consent means they have to give you that before anything. And even in the over-the-counter things that you buy, you really should read about them and find out what they actually do. Every full package insert. And apparently government and authorities and corporations agree, because social media has been banning the posting of package inserts. What does that tell you? Banning knowing what it will do to you? That's like some serious crime that they're doing. Connected with that is the idea that injecting cocktails of toxins, that Mike wrote a great article that we posted on lostartsradio.com recently, got into the details. It's malicious fraud, and most doctors and the so-called scientists and professors at colleges don't know about it, and they want to keep it that way, and soon it might be illegal to talk about any of the stuff that we're talking about in this particular hour. If you want to know about the idea of injecting toxic cocktails into your body through a hollow needle to keep you free from disease, and whether that's really a brilliant idea, read Dr. Tim O'Shea's books. Read Dissolving Illusions by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. Look at Dr. Sherry Tenpenny's free videos all over YouTube still. It's amazing they're not banned, but I don't think they are yet. And also Dr. John Bergman, Bergman, really good one on the flu shot that was out in the last few days, that is now posted on Lost Arts Radio. Why don't the doctors and the healthcare personnel know about it? Because they're educated in big quotation marks, brainwashed. They have to memorize a lot of stuff, like the safe and effective slogan that you may have heard somewhere. But memorization is not learning. You can memorize stuff that's not true, and then you think you're super educated and you know more than everybody. But what if what you memorized is false? You're not very well educated at that point. But that's most of the education now. It's the teachers aren't mostly even allowed to freely teach. They become facilitators, and they have a checklist of things they have to convey to students, and if they don't do that, they're gone. And they're getting everybody into this specialty mentality, so they don't understand the bigger picture, and they can be misused by industry. And the examples of that are everywhere. Scientists misused by drug companies, nuclear power companies, chemical farming companies, told how to teach by just repeating what they memorized. The telecom industry is really misusing its employees, telling them that everything they're doing is safe and it's approved, but the standards by which it approved are all corrupted. So the approval means nothing, except that the government has corruption in it. But what are you not supposed to know about the telecom industry, besides the fact that it's designed to hurt you? Actually designed to hurt you. It's not like it does by mistake, because as Ken Rolla and others on our show have explained, there are other frequencies that they could be using. But Barry Trower, a microwave weapons expert, and also others have been on our show, and you can see the shows in the free archives of lostartsradio.com. He explained that by World War II, they had already perfected microwave frequency weapons that were able to turn individuals into murderers, assassins, make them commit suicide, a lot like what the drug industry is doing to the whole population now by way of antidepressant drugs. And we just got a great article from Mercola posted, who's also been shadow banned down to 99% of what he used to reach. He's, not reaching most of the people he used to now. And he wrote a great article about antidepressants and what they really do. And so we were talking about the frequency weapons and the real whistleblowers, not like the ones that have been in the news lately making stuff up about the president. Making things up doesn't make you a whistleblower. I know that's really hard for a lot of people to comprehend, but it really doesn't. But the real whistleblowers have emerged at the cost of their entire life and exposed the fact that so-called private security companies are developing weapons to do what they could do to individuals at World War II time, to whole communities, whole cities, millions of people at once. Clearly not perfected yet because it hasn't got all of us, but I'm sure it's in use. And, just by looking at the behavior of more and more mobs in the street going crazy and really mad about what they're protesting about, but they don't understand it at all. They just run around screaming and destroying things. So the weaponized microwave frequencies that they use in cell phones and Wi-Fi and smart meters and radar stations and a lot of other wireless devices are intentionally very harmful for health. But the other side of the picture is that it also is really good for total surveillance, and that's what they're moving toward, and that's what the idea is behind the Internet of Things. Most of the world leaders, even if they're good people, Bolsonaro, the U.S. president, many other leaders that really want to help their countries, which is enough to get them killed, as you have seen, they don't know about that the Internet of Things and all the wireless stuff is bad. In fact, the U.S. president has said he's ready for 5G and 6G and 10G and the Internet of Things, and there's all these great companies that are going to provide all these jobs. That's not because he's got bad intent. That's because he's educated. And the educational system is making sure nobody understands this stuff. He's also issued an executive order to make GMOs practically not subject to regulations. That's a really, really big mistake and endangers the whole world. And that's why they want to keep information from reaching him, because his motivation is good. And if he learns what GMOs and wireless are, he'll change those policies. But as of now, they're not. I'm trying to talk fast because we're almost out of time. The president of the U.S. is an illustration of the danger that I said about that specialized knowledge and how dangerous it is because it's misused. A lot of people say that all these deadly advances in technology are for money and power. And yes and no, that's true. But at the corporate level and government agencies, it's true. But sometimes it's true on the positive side too, because if a government wants more jobs for their people and to help the economy, they see that part. But at the higher levels, the people in control are engineering financial systems to enslave and control everybody, leading to total destruction, which is the step after that. And at the top level, they're satanic. It's not about economics at all. That's just used as a tool, and it's actually one of the areas that we're not supposed to understand. You're supposed to think economics is so complicated and impossible to understand that you have to leave it to the experts. That's a big area that is one of the forbidden areas of knowledge that you're not supposed to know. But Ed Griffin's been on the show at Lost Arts Radio, and other people talking about the function of the Federal Reserve and the central banks in each country. There's a central bank controlling out of almost every single country in the world, and the ones that aren't controlled that way have to be destroyed, like Libya. And central bankers are the biggest con artists. I mean, they've gotten into governments and convinced them that, look, you just put us in charge and we'll give you basically unlimited money and power. Of course, it's fake money, and they're not really bringing any money to the table at all. They're just giving themselves the authority to issue money, so-called money based on nothing. and the government leaders fall for it out of greed and ignorance of the trap they're falling into. In the U.S., President Woodrow Wilson in 1913 signed up for this stupid thing after Jackson and others had fought it back in the earlier part of the country's history. And then near the end of his life, Wilson started to realize what was going on, and he said, what did he say? I have unwittingly ruined my country by allowing the central bank to get in control, because then they control the government and they control basically everything. We've got to talk at super speed now. So once the central banks come in, it's pretty much it. That corruption is institutionalized, and the existence of the central banks, whether it's called Federal Reserve or whatever, is one of the foundational reasons that people in rich countries, and almost every country is rich with natural resources that could be turned into wealth. The reason the people there are struggling so much is because the natural wealth of the country is funneled off to the controlling class, orchestrated by the central bank in each country. So I got to skip over some of this. Let me see other notes. We talked about medicine, so-called medicine. A lot of what's wrong with the whole medical thing is the lack of informed consent. And after World War II, there were a whole bunch of countries that signed this agreement called the Geneva Convention. The U.S. is one of them, and most of the other countries. And it said, because of the bad experiments that were done in Germany, that nothing can be done to you medically without your complete informed consent, not just saying it's okay, but understanding what it could do to you. And that's just not happening at all. It's completely illegal. We're taught on TV to use drugs for health, and you get diagnosed so they can say what drug they're going to give you. And you're supposed to forget all about food and water and air and sunlight and exercise and sleep and grounding and kindness to others and nature and the things that really would make you healthy again, and supposed to think that poison is actually medicine. And most of us actually fall for that. So I'm sorry to describe such a nightmare and sci-fi scenario. It would be better if it was made up, but it's actually true, and I understand why people don't want to know about it. But by saying that they don't want to know about it, they're playing right into the biggest area we're not supposed to know about, which is who we are. And that's all about consciousness. And if we learn that, then all the fear and the hate go away, and the division and what they're pushing on us to hate people of other races and other classes, and even the perpetrators of all these crimes, hating them is a real big mistake as well, because that's a frequency that's going to dull your awareness and of what you would be able to otherwise do. So obviously, above everything else, they need to keep us unconscious of who we are. And that turns out to be the hint of what we need to do. So I told you, I totally trust government and industry authorities. So they're telling us what to do, by saying that we should remain unaware of who we are and fall into all these stereotypes, of reasons why we have to hate everybody else, and left and right have to kill each other, and all these stupid ideas which are not true. I suggest starting with your physical health and break through what we're taught and learn the natural laws of harmony with nature that have been taught since before history started. Learn the real laws of nature and how to bring your life into harmony with them. Read the Essene Gospel of Peace, Volume 1. Read Heal Yourself 101 if you're interested in this kind of thing. They don't agree with raw milk, which I really use a lot too, but the basic idea in Heal Yourself 101 is very sound. And in the Essene Gospel, they do use raw milk and other kinds of raw food and fasting and other natural things. It's really interesting. Become aware of your mind and your body in a new way and reawaken the connection to your source. Not talking about religion. Keep whatever religion you want, but I'm saying go deeper and really connect to what the religion's talking about on a much deeper level, and start to observe patterns and events in your life, all the events and all the interactions, and start to see consciousness everywhere, because that's the biggest secret. It is everywhere. The idea of inanimate objects is not what they're telling you it is. So once you start to see that, the conspiracy and collusion is really horrible, and overwhelming on the dark side, but it's nothing compared to what you discover on the light side, which is real. And when you find out this consciousness that people refer to as God or spirit, or the word is irrelevant. It's the reality of it that matters. And when you start seeing that everywhere and understanding a little bit of how it works, the impressive hierarchy of darkness is like nothing. It's microscopic. And when the barriers get dissolved, then the reality starts to be able to come through you and everything can change. And a few of us could start that chain reaction. That's really the motive of taking the time to even look at all this stuff. So if you want to get deeper into that, and I'm over time by a minute now, I got to stop, but you want to get deeper into that, check out Planetary Healing Club. PlanetaryHealingClub.com is the access point. If you're not sure about whether it would be worth it for you, write questions or comments or anything to me, Richard@LostArtsRadio.com, or I occasionally do some private sessions with people if you want it tailored to what you're dealing with in your life and health situations. Now, I will talk to you, but there are disclaimers so that the powers that be know I'm not doing medical advice or anything else forbidden, so that they don't shut us down right away. But I will do some private sessions with people, and check that out by writing me, Richard@LostArtsRadio.com. I'll tell you what's involved. Also, we have a new Subscribestar page, subscribestar.com/LostArtsRadio, Lost Arts Radio mailing list at LostArtsRadio.com to get on in case we disappear otherwise. And tomorrow night's show on Sunday, Susan Nealon's amazing lady that I think you'd like to join me to talk to tomorrow night, 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern, Lost Arts Radio. And thanks for being with me and hanging out this long. I appreciate your time very much. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you here next time.